All right. It's 7:30, and I think we should go ahead and get started here. So, on behalf of the San Francisco Baha'i community, I wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight. In the current moment, with so much uncertainty in the world, we hope that by joining this program tonight, you find it spiritually uplifting and joyful. Of course, this celebration is taking on a new meaning for us during this pandemic, as it is meant to be a source of great joy and spiritual fulfillment during otherwise a very difficult time. I wanted to first start by especially thanking the San Francisco Interfaith Council for the invitation to the Baha'i community to share this important holy day with many of you who might be tuning in to hear about it for the very first time. For those of you who are not familiar with the Baha'i faith, it is an independent world religion that believes in the fundamental oneness of all the world's religions and believes that its mission is to work towards the unification of humankind. Friends, today marks the 9th day of the festival of Ridván. Now, at the end of April in 1863, shortly before leaving for Istanbul from Baghdad, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, gathered his companions together for 12 days in a garden which he named Ridván, which means paradise. And it's there that he declared himself to be a messenger of God. So you can understand how special and celebrated this period is for Baha'is from all over the world. Now, tonight is a special treat for me to welcome Luke Slot to the broadcast. Luke is a recording artist and performer from Ireland. Born into a musical family in Dublin, he began playing music at an early age, learning guitar and trumpet from his father and studying piano at the Royal Irish Academy of Music. While he was still in high school, he was signed to a deal by Sony Music, but later he went out on his own to be an independent artist. Luke has traveled extensively, giving concerts and music workshops in over 20 countries. And at the age of 21, Luke discovered the Baha'i faith and began to incorporate the Baha'i teachings into his music. Now, in 2021, the global Baha'i community will commemorate a historic occasion, the 100th anniversary of the passing of Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. Luke is currently working on a new album in honor of that occasion. But tonight he will be sharing with us a special program called the Garden of Paradise in celebration of this 9th day of the festival of Ridván. The other piece of information I wanted to share is that the San Francisco community is co-hosting with the Melbourne community a celebration of the 12th and final day of Ridván at 8 p.m. And we'll provide information about that later in the program. I see that there are folks from all over the world that are tuning in, from Ecuador and Australia to New Zealand to Canada to Bolivia. Welcome to you all. We're excited to have you here. With that, please sit back, relax, and I hope that you enjoy Luke's presentation called the Garden of Paradise.
Thank you very much, Fadi, and thank you all for tuning in. It's so lovely to be able to connect like this, and in spite of the circumstances, to spend this time together and to celebrate together. So I really appreciate you all coming online to celebrate this very special day together. So I hope everyone is in good health wherever you're watching from. I hope your loved ones are in good health too, and I want to just express my thanks first of all to the Baha'i community of San Francisco for hosting this event and for inviting me to share some music and stories to celebrate the Festival of Ridván together. The San Francisco Baha'is have been very kindly sheltering me ever since the pandemic began, and I'm very grateful to this community and happy to be able to celebrate with you together. So as Badi mentioned, today is the 9th day of Ridván, And for anybody who is not familiar with Ridván, as Badi mentioned, the festival of Ridván means the festival of paradise, and it marks the most significant and joyful occasion in the history of the Baha'i faith, because it essentially marks the moment that the Baha'i faith began, in a sense, and really, so it's a celebration of the renewal of humanity's spiritual life. And today, the 9th day of Ridván, is a day that has a very special significance, which I'm going to try and focus on for today's program, which will be about an hour of music and stories. The 9th day is a day that, for historical reasons, directs our attention towards the importance of family. And so I really want to focus on that through this program. And I think that, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to play a selection of songs that almost all of these songs use words from the Baha'i sacred writings. And so these are prayers or passages that I've set to music. And these are writings that perhaps if you're hearing them for the first time tonight, these are writings that touch on a broad range of subjects related to our spiritual lives. And, I think that our spiritual lives are so connected with our family lives that we can scarcely overestimate how much one influences the other. And so I really hope that this program will be, I hope that we can think of this as more than a concert, but perhaps I hope that we can think of this as a kind of a meditative time to use through the music and through these words that I'm going to sing and stories that I'll share. I hope this can be a time for us all to just reflect on the importance of family and what family means to each of us. I hope that the music will give you a chance to have some personal reflections of your own in that area. I think we're living in a time when our sense of what are the important things in life is really being, I would say, finely tuned. So I hope this program will give you a sense to just reflect on those things. So I'd actually like to begin by singing a prayer on something very important. I'd like to sing a prayer for all of those families around the world who have lost loved ones to COVID-19, and who are now in this very unexpected and sudden period of grief. So if anybody watching has lost a loved one to COVID-19, or if you know families who have lost somebody in this pandemic, I invite you to bring them to mind during this prayer, which is a prayer for healing. And I sing this for anybody who has lost a loved one and is working through the process of healing from their grief. Thy name is my healing, oh my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art the all bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise. Thy name is my healing, oh my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Okay, so I'd like to begin this program by sharing just a brief little bit of kind of personal family background, just as a way of kind of feeling connected to the ninth day of Ridván, and I hope this might help you to sort of feel connected to it as well, and get a sense of the significance of this ninth day of Ridván. So when I was in my teens back in Ireland, my older brother Mike, who's a few years older than me, and he came of age and packed up and left home and set out on his adventures of his life. He moved across the water to Scotland, and he went to university there in Glasgow, and he ended up spending about 5 years studying and working in Glasgow. And one day in the middle of these, about halfway through these 5 years, my brother called home to tell the family that he had, through a group of friends that he had gotten to know in Glasgow, he had come in contact with this what seemed like a kind of obscure new religion called the Baha'i faith. And he had not only been studying this religion, but he had actually embraced it and had become a Baha'i. And this was a great surprise to my family, because almost nobody in the family had ever heard of this religion before. I certainly had never heard of it. And in fact, the only person in the family who had ever heard the name Baha'i before was our mother. And our mother had heard of this. The reason that our mother had heard of the Baha'i faith was because many years previously, long before my brother and I were even born, our mother, in her own student days, had gone off on her own adventures and had gone on a journey across the Mediterranean Sea. She had travelled by boat along the coasts of France and Italy and Greece, and had travelled all the way to the eastern ends of the Mediterranean Sea to Israel, where her boat had finally pulled in to the city of Haifa. And Haifa, as you may well know, is a port city that is built up around one of the most spiritually iconic mountains in the world, Mount Carmel. And Mount Carmel, of course, is a mountain that is revered and acclaimed both by Christians as the mountain where Christ walked, and by Jews as this place where the prophet Elijah dwelt in his cave. And Mount Carmel is described in the ancient Jewish scriptures as this kind of mysterious place that is of great spiritual significance for the future of the world. Well, by the time that my mother stepped off the boat in Haifa, Mount Carmel, through a series of extraordinarily dramatic historical events involving the collapse of empires and the disintegration of monarchies, and involving some of the most powerful world leaders of the last 200 years, through this series of events, Mount Carmel had become the world center of the Baha'i faith, and it was being cultivated and transformed into these beautiful gardens, these terraced gardens, cascading down the slopes of this mountain. And within those gardens, amidst a corridor of cypress trees and beautiful red geraniums, there is a little gathering of 4 marble monuments. And those marble monuments mark the resting places of the wife, the daughter, one of the sons, and the daughter-in-law of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. And my mother stepped off the boat in Haifa, climbed up that mountain, and visited those gardens and that sacred place, without ever knowing that years later her as yet unborn sons would also visit those gardens to pay homage to that family who now rests in the slopes of Mount Carmel. And so I would like to actually sing some words of Baha'u'llah that he wrote that make a very interesting connection between the significance of Mount Carmel as this place of great spiritual significance, and the extraordinary character of this day and age that we all now live in, this kind of miraculous age in which we can all sit together in different parts of the world and connect with each other and feel like we're sitting together in one living room around the world. This is an extract from Baha'u'llah's Tablet of Carmel. All glory be to this day. All glory be to this day, the day in which the fragrances of mercy have been wafted over all created things. A day so blessed that past ages and centuries can never hope to rival it. A day in which the countenance of the Ancient of Days hath turned towards his holy above of all created things, and beyond them the concourse on high, where heard calling aloud, haste thee, O Carmel, for lo, the light of the countenance of God, the ruler of the kingdom of names, and fashioner of the heavens, hath been lifted upon thee. So the significance of the 9th day of Ridván is that it was a day in which these members of Baha'u'llah's family, who today rest in the gardens on the slopes of Mount Carmel, were reunited with Baha'u'llah after a period in which they had become temporarily separated from him. And it is this day of reunion that we are really celebrating today, and all that represents. And so throughout this program, I'd really like to sing some pieces as in tribute to those members of Baha'u'llah's family who we are really bringing to mind today, and who can, whose remembrance can really remind us to reflect on the importance of our own family connections and relationships. So one of those family members that I would love to share a little bit about was, of course, Baha'u'llah's wife, whose name was Asiya Khanum, but to whom Baha'u'llah gave a very special name, Nawab, which means noble. And what was very special about this name that he gave her was that this name, Nawab, the noble one, was a name that in society at that time, in 19th century Persian society, this name, noble, was a name that was only ever given to men. And so, in giving this name to his wife, Baha'u'llah really paved the way for the beginnings of radical changes in the social relationships between men and women that were to unfold over the coming decades and centuries. And there are some really beautiful recollections about Nawab that were recorded by her and Baha'u'llah's daughter, whose name was Bahiya Khanum, and I'd love to share a little bit about her later on. But she left an amazing description of the kind of life that Baha'u'llah and Nawab lived in the early years of their marriage, and both of them had been born into noble families both of their families were members of the really elite Persian aristocracy. And their daughter describes how strange it was that even in the early years of their marriage, as these two newlyweds, who were, expected to follow the social expectations and, live a life of great prestige and wealth and comfort and separate from the lower classes of society, how strange it was that these two newlyweds essentially turned their back on all that prestige and fame that would have been theirs and became this dynamic partnership dedicated to caring for the poor in their hometown. And their daughter wrote this beautiful passage, which I'll share with you. She said, "In the early years of their married life, They, my father and mother, took part as little as possible in state functions, social ceremonies, and the luxurious habits of ordinary, highly placed and wealthy families in the land of Persia. She and her noble-hearted husband counted these worldly pleasures meaningless and preferred rather to occupy themselves in caring for the poor and for all who were unhappy or in trouble. From our doors nobody was ever turned away. The hospitable board was spread for all comers. Constantly the poor women came to my mother, to whom they poured out their various stories of woe, to be comforted and consoled by her loving helpfulness. Whilst the people called my father the father of the poor, they spoke of my mother as the mother of consolation. I always think of her, in those earliest days of my memory, as queenly in her dignity and loveliness, full of consideration for everybody, gentle, of a marvellous unselfishness. No action of hers ever failed to show the loving kindness of her pure heart. Her very presence seemed to make an atmosphere of love and happiness wherever she came, enfolding all corners in the fragrance of gentle courtesy. So, although Nawab, like Baha'u'llah, had been born into great wealth and nobility, her life, in the course of their marriage, was going to go in a very different and really extremely difficult direction, and she was destined to share with her husband decades of exile and imprisonment as a cost for the things that Baha'u'llah was teaching, such as the oneness of humanity, the unity of all religions, and perhaps that teaching that was most significant for Nawab, the advancement of women's rights. And so I'd like to sing now some words that Baha'u'llah wrote. These are words of encouragement in the face of great difficulty, and I'd like to now sing this in honor of Nawab, who we are calling to our minds today. This is called Sorrow Not. Sorrow not if in these days and on this earthly plane things contrary to your wishes have been ordained and manifested by God for days of blissful joy, of heavenly delight, are assuredly in store for you. Worlds holy and spiritually glorious will be unveiled to your eyes. You are destined by Him in this world and hereafter to partake of their benefits, to share in their joys and obtain a portion of their sustaining grace. To each and every one of them you will no doubt attain to each and every one of them. You will no doubt attain to each and every one of them. You will no doubt attain. So, another member of Baha'u'llah's family who also now rests on the slopes of Mount Carmel is his daughter, Bahi'a Khanum, who gave us that beautiful recollection of her mother during her early life and her early marriage to Baha'u'llah. And Bahi'a Khanum was also destined to... she was destined for a great future. In fact, she was destined to become known as the most outstanding heroine of the entire history of the Baha'i faith. And she would become immortalized by a very special title which her father gave her, the greatest holy leaf. And for a time in the early 20th century, many years after her parents had passed away, the greatest holy leaf actually became the functional leader of the entire Baha'i world. There was a time when the Baha'i community, this really fledgling community, was swept into what was probably the greatest storm, the greatest trial of its history. And the greatest holy leaf, through this incredible, outstanding capacity that she had for leadership, she steered the ship of this fledgling, kind of fragile, new faith through this storm and guided it to safety. And she managed to unite a community that was being really savagely attacked by enemies who were determined to shatter its unity and break it apart. And there are some really beautiful recollections about the greatest holy leaf, which I'd love to share with you, just to get a glimpse of some of these amazing qualities that she had, and this really kind of very unique form of leadership that she had, that really gives a lot of food for thought. These are some recollections from people who knew her. These are compiled in a really wonderful book called Prophet's Daughter by Janet Khan. So she's, this is, oops, here we are. It says, something greater than forgiveness she had shown in meeting the cruelties and strictures in her own life. To be hurt and to forgive is saintly, but far beyond this is the power to comprehend and not to be hurt. This power she had. You were sure that if one tried to hurt her, she would wish to console him for his own cruelty. For her love was unconditioned, could penetrate disguise and see hunger behind the mask of fury, and she knew that the most brutal self is secretly hoping to find gentleness in another. Her balance, sense of fineness and fitness and practical judgment she displayed in creating order and grace in the household, and all the elements that make for well-being, she blended in an ambience of harmony. Her strong will was never used to override, and her decided opinions were never pressed upon another. Her ways were gentle. Others might break the shell with a blow. It was for her to unsheath the kernel with infinite care and skill. In her you met with no exactions, no biddance. She beckoned, smiling, and would have no one come heavy-footed or bent to her will. So quietly did she make her influence felt that you were scarcely conscious of its working. And so today on the 9th day of Ridván, as we're bringing to mind some of these members of Baha'u'llah's family, I hope that we can bring to mind some of these really extraordinary qualities of leadership that were exhibited by his daughter, the greatest holy leaf. And I'd like to now sing another piece from the Baha'i writings. This is another prayer that is also similarly for strength in the face of difficulties. And I'd like to now sing this in honor of Baha'u'llah's daughter, the greatest holy leaf. Is there any remover of difficulties? Save God, say praised be God. He is God, all are his servants, and all abide by his bidding. Is there any remover of difficulties? Save God, say praised be God. He is God, all are his servants, and all abide by his bidding. Say God sufficeth all things, above all things. Say God sufficeth all things, above all things, and nothing in the heavens, nothing in the heavens or in the earth, but God sufficeth. And nothing in the heavens, nothing in the heavens or in the earth, but God sufficeth. Is there any remover of difficulties? Save God. Is there any remover of difficulties? Save God. Okay, so with these little glimpses of these members of Baha'u'llah's family in our minds, I'd like us to now retrace the steps of the family way back to a time when the greatest holy leaf was just a young girl of about 15 years old. And I want to go back to that time, that moment of the very first festival of Ridván, which took place in 1863 in the city of Baghdad, in a rose garden just on the banks of the river that flows through Baghdad. And I hope that just by exploring some of this background, we can get a sense of the significance of the 9th day of Ridván. So at this time of the first Ridván, Baha'u'llah and his family had gone through a series of major crises which had drastically changed their lives. And these crises had all begun back in their homeland of Persia, which is, of course, now known as modern-day Iran, where 19 years previous to the first festival of Ridván, a young man in Persia who called himself the Bab, which means the gate, had sent a kind of what we might call a spiritual shockwave through the whole nation of Persia, when he claimed that he was essentially a kind of a new prophet who had been sent into the world with a very special purpose. And that purpose was to prepare the world for the coming of that great promised one who is awaited by all of the world's great religions. And of course, this expectation of some figure, some great promised one who will appear in the future and will bring about some great transformation in the world, is a promise which somewhat strangely is a promise that is shared by just about all of the great spiritual traditions of the world. They all have this expectation of this promised one to appear in the future. And thousands of people across Persia embraced the message of the Bab, and they began to prepare themselves for the coming of this promised one. But at the same time, the authorities in Persia became extremely threatened by the influence of this young man, the Bab, and they rose up to crush the message of the Bab. The Bab himself was publicly executed on the orders of the Shah, the king of Persia. Thousands of his followers were put to death, and a group of them were arrested and expelled from Persia, sent into exile, never to return. And among this group of the Bab's followers who were exiled from their homeland were Baha'u'llah and Nawab and their children, who had not only embraced that, they had not only been among the thousands of people who had embraced the message of the Bab. Baha'u'llah in particular had become one of the greatest really champions of the Bab's message. But now, stripped of their possessions, their homes destroyed, all of the securities of their noble families that they had been born into, all these securities forever gone, Baha'u'llah and Nawab now had to settle into a life of exile in the city of Baghdad in Iraq, which was the place to which they were sent, which was a place where they could it was a city where they could at least live in some degree of safety and freedom. And even though the circumstances of their lives had drastically changed, they somehow re-established that great spirit of hospitality and open-heartedness that they had become famous for back home in Persia. They flung open the door of their simple little home of exile in the city of Baghdad, and they began to involve themselves in the life of society, helping the poor, actively getting involved in ways that they could improve the state of society around them. And just like their home back in Persia, their home in Baghdad became something of a refuge. People would come and, they would help people with whatever problems they were facing in their lives. They would help people feel like they could get through them. And their home became this haven for the poor, the sick, the distressed of Baghdad. And soon enough, hundreds of people were coming to the home of Baha'u'llah and Nawab as a refuge in their city. And Baha'u'llah became a kind of a guide and a teacher to these people. He started to introduce to them useful principles that could help them navigate through the difficulties that their lives threw at them. And I'd like to actually share with you a short little description of some of these principles that Baha'u'llah began to share with the people of Baghdad. This is a short little description from a book called God Passes by Shoghi Effendi. The emphasis placed on the principle of non-violence, the stress laid on godliness, kindliness, humility and piety, on honesty and truthfulness, chastity and fidelity, on justice, toleration, sociability, amity and concord, on the acquisition of arts and sciences, on self-sacrifice and detachment, on patience, steadfastness and resignation to the will of God. All these constitute the salient features of a code of ethical conduct revealed during those years by Baha'u'llah. And beyond Baha'u'llah's personal interactions with the people of Baghdad, one way in which these principles that he was teaching began to exert an effect on the city was through his writings, which began to spread out beyond Baghdad and began to spread out all around the Middle East at the time. And I'd like to now sing a passage from some of these things that Baha'u'llah wrote. This is a poetic, short verse, which I think provides an example of some of the guidance that Baha'u'llah was offering to people to help them develop their spiritual lives. And I think that this piece is particularly appropriate to Ridván, which always brings to mind this image of a garden of paradise. This piece is called Garden of Thy Heart. Oh, friend, oh, friend, in the garden of thy heart plant naught but the rose of love. And from the nightingale of affection and desire, loosen not thy hold. Treasure the companionship of the righteous, and eschew all fellowship with the ungodly. Treasure the companionship of the righteous, and eschew all fellowship with the ungodly. In the garden of thy heart plant naught but the rose of love. So after 10 years of living as an exile in the city of Baghdad and pouring out this really this abundance of hospitality and of spiritual guidance to the people of the city, Baha'u'llah and his family were struck by another crisis. In the year 1863, a decree, a royal decree, arrived in the city ordering that Baha'u'llah and his family were to be sent into exile a second time, permanently removed from Baghdad. And because the people of Baghdad had really become so attached to Baha'u'llah and his family, they were broken-hearted at the prospect of their departure. And so, even though they were powerless to change this royal decree, the best that they could do was to provide a large space, a large open-air space in the city that Baha'u'llah could use to say goodbye one last time to the people of the city. And that space was a beautiful, finely cultivated rose garden on an island in the river that runs through Baghdad. And that garden has come to be known as the Garden of Ridván, the Garden of Paradise. And Baha'u'llah arrived in that garden and pitched a tent there amongst the roses. And he lived in this garden for 12 days so that the people of the city could come in their crowds to say goodbye to him one last time. But on the day that Baha'u'llah arrived in this garden, on the first of these 12 days that he spent there, Baha'u'llah gathered together those few companions who were with him, who had gone with him that first day to help pitch his tent and set up the garden. He gathered them around him and he shared with them a secret that he had been keeping his whole life. He announced to them that he was in fact that one that the Bab had prepared the way for, the one for whom all of the world's religions had been waiting for thousands and thousands of years. He was the promised one, and they didn't have to wait any longer. And he told this group of companions that he was going to deliver to the world a message which would give humanity the tools required to establish universal peace and to bring humanity together as one united family. And this day, this announcement that Baha'u'llah made is now celebrated every year as the most joyful occasion in the history of the Baha'i faith, the declaration of Baha'u'llah on the first day of Ridván. But another very dramatic event also occurred on that first day of Ridván. Shortly after Baha'u'llah had arrived in the garden and pitched his tent and made this historic announcement to those companions who were with him, shortly after this, the river around the island began to flood and the waters rose so high that it was impossible for people to cross and actually join him in the garden. And this included his family. Nawab, the greatest holy leaf, and several other members of the family were unable to cross the river on that day and to join him. And this flood lasted for 8 days, during which Baha'u'llah and his family were separated from each other by the waters of the river. But on the 9th day, the waters of the flood finally subsided, and Nawab and the greatest holy leaf and the rest of the family were able to cross the river and join Baha'u'llah in the garden. And that day is the very day that we are celebrating today, the 9th day, when the family was reunited in the Garden of Paradise. And I think that this 9th day, it also carries this great symbolic significance, because I think that, we live in a time when, on a surface level, humanity seems to be becoming more and more connected and in some ways more united. But if we look past the surface and we scratch a little deeper, we see that we live in a time when humanity is becoming in some ways increasingly separated from itself as a family. We live in a time when humanity is in a way being engulfed by a flood of things like conflict, disunity, increasing tension between people of different groups and nations, terrorism, religious fanaticism, all these things that prevent us from being united. And I think that the celebration of the 9th day of Ridván is a reminder of this need, this crying need that we have to be reunited as one human family. And I think that that is perhaps one aspect of the significance of the 9th day of Ridván as a day of reunion. And so I'd like to sing one last song just to finish our story of Ridván. And as I said at the beginning, the story of Ridván is really marks the opening moments and the beginning of the Baha'i faith. And so for that reason, it's really just the opening chapter of a much bigger story that bursts out of this initial scene of this garden of Ridván and actually carries this family of Baha'u'llah on a series of banishments that bring them all the way, eventually, to the slopes of Mount Carmel, in that little piece of land on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, which throughout history has been revered by Jews, Christians and Muslims alike as the Holy Land. And so I'd like to finish with one last song, and in the spirit of the 9th day of Ridván, I'd like to dedicate this last song to my mother, who so many years before my brother and I were born, walked through the gardens of Mount Carmel and actually visited that sacred ground where the family of Baha'u'llah now rest. This is called Have You Heard?
Have you heard of the troubles of Moses? So much light on the earth he did shed. Well, all the people, they rose up against him, and they rained down their darts on his head. And he came with a message of peace, love, and justice, and the promise of a great one to come, when the wolf and the lamb will dwell together, and the whole human race will be one. Now, have you heard of the sufferings of Jesus? How pure and selfless he was. Well, all the people, they rose up when on earth it will be as in heaven, and the whole human race will be one. Now, have you heard of the sorrows of Buddha? When he looked at the sadness of man, well, all the people, they rose up against him and put nothing but sadness in his hand. And he came with a message of peace, love, and justice, and the promise of a great one to come, when peace shall reign on earth forever, and the whole human race will be one. Now, have you heard of the woes of Muhammad? All the bruises and abuses he bore. Well, all the people, they rose up against him, and they closed in his face every door. And he came with a message of peace, love, and justice, and the promise of a great one to come, when all the people will be gathered together, and the whole human race will be one. Now I don't ask you to believe me when I tell you Baha'u'llah has come. I just ask you, my brother, to see me, and the whole human race as one. No, I don't ask you to believe me when I tell you Baha'u'llah has come. I and the whole human race as one, as one.
Okay, and that is the something of the story of the 9th day of Ridván. So thank you all.
Luke, thank you so much. I'm sure everyone who is joining us is sitting back and applauding you and thanking you for such a wonderful evening. What an incredible treat for us. Thank you for the uplifting music and the story. And to all of you who tuned in, thank you for spending the last hour of your Tuesday night with us. We really appreciate it. We had folks from all over the world, from Ecuador, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, here in California. Lots of wonderful places joining us this evening. Luke, can you please remind us the name of that very last song that you sang, and also where those that are tuning in can find your music?
Sure, that last song is called Have You Heard? And you can find it on YouTube if you go to my YouTube channel. And of course, feel welcome to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I put music and videos up there regularly. So you'll find it on youtube.com/LukeSlot. Or if you just search for Have You Heard, you'll find it there along with all my other music. And also, I'd love to invite people to, if you'd like to stay in touch and get occasional news from me about my music, you're welcome to join my email list at lukeslot.com.
Perfect. I love it. You know, this was such a wonderful evening. For those that are interested to learn more about the Baha'i faith, as Luke described the story, you can learn more by visiting Baha'i.org. If you'd like to contact us here locally in San Francisco, please don't hesitate. You can reach us here at sfbaha'i.org, and we would love to have a virtual chat or have a virtual conversation together in these times, and share with you a little more about our upcoming events. In fact, one of those events that is coming is the 12th day of Ridván celebration. And we talked about this at the top of the hour. We are partnering with the Melbourne community, and thank you, Luke, once again for joining us there. That will be this coming Friday. Do I have that correct?
Oh, that's actually Thursday night.
Thursday night, excuse me, at 8.
Friday in Melbourne, Thursday night in San Francisco.
Let's do some quick calculation there. So Thursday night, 8 p.m. here in San Francisco. If you're in Melbourne, it'll be Friday. You can join us at sfbaha'i.org/holydays. Easy to remember, sfbaha'i.org/holydays. And again, you'll have a treat waiting for you there. So once again, Luke, thank you for spending the evening with us. To all of you watching, thank you for joining us, and we hope you have had a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thanks, and have a good night.